Hi, my name is Mark Levitt, and I'm going to continue reading the Triunistic Model of Reality, Chapter 2, titled Do. We'll begin with February 12th, 2013, where I write, if the main point of the last chapter was that this is it, then the main point of this chapter is that everything in and of this world takes on the qualities of the original dynamic of which our world is a reflection of. And once again, the original dynamic is the eternal act of aware space contracting within itself from the sheer power of the magnetic attraction to itself. In the original pulse, or the causeless cause, is this tension caused from awareness being attracted to itself. Since the pulse that this tension creates is nothing other than aware space contracting within itself to form a vortex of experience, i.e. the individual, everything in that individuated vortex of experience will naturally and unavoidably mirror that which parented it, which is the pulsation of aware space. So that is why when we examine this emergent biological life at its most fundamental level, we only find the same pulsation that created it in the first place, whether it be the opening and closing of our heartbeat, or the rising and falling of our brain waves. Every biological process that sustains or balances our lives is a mirror image of the original pulse, and that original pulse or vortex of experience is our individuated life. Even when scientists measure or otherwise study electricity itself, they reveal an oscillating or pulsating vibration, much like the classic Om, that mystics find to be the original pulse. In fact, light itself is the product of this same oscillating principle. But for me, the coolest part about the relationship between a waveform and the pulse that emerges from the waveform's potential is that it perfectly mirrors the original dynamic of the singularity manifesting as individuality. And what I mean by that is that if you start with a singular waveform that is flatlined, this would represent the base, which is undifferentiated awareness, or God, or potential. The path would be the contraction of the waveform that represents undifferentiated awareness, God, or potential. And the fruit of this contraction would be the emergence of a waveform that rose from the pure potentiality of the flat line. So let me go ahead and diagram that for you. So what I'm saying is that the original, the unmanifest, would be represented just by the flat line. The contraction of the flat line, there you go, that would be the pulse. And what I'm saying is that everything that created everything that's going to exist within that pulse, within here, is going to be a reflection of the dynamic of the flat line, the baseline that it is, and then the contraction in itself, and the result is within the pulse itself. This original dynamic of contraction consistently and necessarily results in the potential of a flat line to manifest as an emerged waveform. Or as I just outlined, this contraction similarly results in the pulsation of undifferentiated awareness manifesting as individualized consciousness, God manifesting as the world, or potential manifesting as emergence. So while the flat line itself is an undifferentiated singularity, through the process of contraction, it magically transforms itself into the vast and complex infinite variety of appearances that we have come to call our universe. The reason that the pulsation plays such an important part in all of creation is because it is this simple act that allows the infinite to appear as finite. The flat line itself has no beginning. Draw that again. So let's outline that. So the flat line itself has no beginning or end, as it just represents the infinite. But if you introduce just the smallest differentiation, just the slightest differentiation, which is for a line would necessarily be a contraction, that differentiation, then this infinite line will manifest as an appearance of a beginning and an end to a single waveform, or an individualized being, or a world, or more generally, an emergent property that arose from the pure potential. All right. But never for a second should we ever mistake the apparent waveform or the emergent property, the world, individualized consciousness, to be anything other than what it actually is, which is the flat line itself, or undifferentiated awareness. And the beat goes on. Okay, so now we continue to 4/25/2013, where I write, I have been seeing how everything in life is just mirroring what I call the original tension, which is awareness being attracted to itself. It's like everything else is just another layer or variation on the same theme of that initial nub. The original tension manifests as awareness of awareness, or what we call duality. Then duality, as an emergent property, it creates another layer that we call fear/desire. Fear/desire represents our attraction/repulsion instincts. Then fear/desire, as an emergent property, manifests as biologically needing to consummate with some life forms and then consuming other life forms while avoiding being consumed by them first. After that, the next layers just keep getting increasingly more complex, ultimately taking shape as our world's cultures, politics, religion, economics, etc., all the way down to the details of our very personal story. Then I continue on May 25th, 2013, I write, I use the term original dynamic as an alternative to creation stories, such as the Big Bang or Genesis. The reason I call it the original dynamic is because the term refers to the actual source of this miraculous and spontaneous arising of appearances, while doing so in the present tense. Creation stories never made much sense for me due to the inherent temporal nature of any creation story. But the original dynamic is not a mere sequence of events, even though it is mirrored in the dualistic world of sequential events. But the original dynamic itself is outside of time, as it simply refers to the inherent inseparability of aware space manifesting as the dualistic world, in which we are able to measure time and space. So once we get to the point that we could talk about a dualistic world, that's when measurement is able to be talked about. And it is by observing nature, the natural laws that govern this dualistic world, that we discover how the original dynamic mirrors itself in every aspect of the dualistic world's natural order. From the activity of procreation, we witness how this pattern plays itself out endlessly, evolving while simultaneously maintaining its original dynamic. We are all witnessing the actual Big Bang and Genesis story all wrapped up in one, and it is still happening at this very moment on every level of existence. I want to end this particular thought with an outline of how the original dynamic mirrors itself in the very world that it manifests as. So what I did here is I outlined the dynamic of the base, path, and fruit, which I designated the original dynamic of the base, path, and fruit I designated as the inseparability of aware space manifesting as duality. Now, duality, as you come to the bottom, then that has its own triune. So now this duality, which mirrors the original dynamic, so basically the inseparability of space and awareness manifesting as duality. So what I'm saying is duality has its own triune, and the triune of duality is down here. The duality mirroring the original dynamic, which once again, its base is space, just as the base of original dynamic is space. The path is time, and the fruit is matter. So within fruit, they have their own continuum. The space-time-matter continuum mirrors the original continuum, which is aware-space duality. Another point that will come up again, that I'll bring up in the next chapter, mirrors that dynamic, where what I found that every single base, path, and fruit, so let's say you have a base, path, and a fruit. What I'm saying is that fruit itself is also going to mirror the original dynamic, and so it is going to have a base, path, and a fruit. So the fruit itself will become the base, and it will have a base, path, and a fruit. All right. So let's look at the fruit of the original dynamic, which is duality or the dualistic world. And notice that when we examine the base, path, and fruit of duality's nature, we will find it to be a mirrored image of the original dynamic. The reason that space is correlated with the inactive base, while time is correlated with the active path, is because space refers to the measurement of the inactive stillness, while time refers to the measurement of active movement. Interestingly enough, the inseparability of space-time not only has been determined to affect matter, but likewise, matter has also been found to affect the inseparability of space-time. My personal favorite of the original dynamic is the aforementioned aware space, manifesting as duality. But I want to end this thought with a few more examples that also describe the original dynamic. In all of these examples, the first and original of the pairing triunes are subtler versions of the latter. For example, the most general and basic dynamic that I've noticed is that all of creation begins with some sort of tension. So what I did was I labeled 3 different pairings of base, path, and fruit. And the reason I did that is because I noticed there's always a subtle layer before actually things start to manifest. There's always a subtle layer, even before the first layer that you could even talk about. So to better explain that, what I notice is that what we always talk about is the triune of God, man, and the world. because those are the only things that we know, that we could talk about. Even though God is the unknown, it's still an unknown that we can talk about, or an unknown that we think that we know, or an unknown that we know. There's unknowns that we know are there, and so God would be labeled as one of those unknowns. But what I'm saying is there's unknowns that we don't even know that we don't know, and that is the more subtle level that comes first. So how I've designated these is that the original triune, the base, path, and fruit, is not God, man, and the world, but instead just the base is just isness, just the essence of isness. Then the path is attention, just attention, any type of activity, any type of action, energy, active energy. And then the fruit would be creation, just in general, very, very general. So within that creation, so if that would be the subtler version, the more gross version would be now God, man, and the world. Again, down here, we'll take another triune, inactive, the inseparability of inactive, manifest as the manifest. And a more gross or denser version of that would actually be capacity being the base, consciousness being the path, and duality being the fruit. Again, at the bottom, we have awareness, contracting to create awareness of itself. That would be the most subtle level. And then a more dense version of that would be life, learning, love as the fruit. All right, so now we continue where I write, whether it be broadly speaking of the contraction of awareness, which transforms the potential into an emergent dualistic world, or more specifically, the agitation of a seed transforming the potential into an emergent plant, or the rubbing of a stick transforming the potential into an emergent fire, etc. Everything always begins with this tension and results in something emerging from the potentiality. This subject in particular is perhaps the most relevant in my life at this exact point in time. I am reminded of how the sense of an original dynamic has evolved for me over time, and I've now come to refer to this experience of the original dynamic as the original dimension, or the substratum. This is an important delineation because the original dimension refers to the original dynamic as a field or a space in which this dynamic takes place. The way I experience the everyday world now is that I sense this substratum or original dimension to be the actual source that emanates or enlivens this apparent dimension, the dimension of appearances, duality. I'm going to read that again. I'm going to read that sentence again. The way I experience the everyday world now is that I sense this substratum or original dimension to be the actual source that emanates or enlivens this apparent dimension. The substratum is the true and actual driving force for everything we see and experience in this physically apparent dimension. It is like I can see an image of the substratum in my mind's eye from time to time. The substratum of our physical dimension of reality lies just underneath the appearances we see, and it is this substratum that guides and changes all movements in the physical dimension, but on a very broad and grand scale. I liken it to a vast sun that shines down on everything equally, but at the same time, it is impersonally affecting each individual thing differently based on its unique attributes. So now I'll continue to April 27th, 2013, where I write, originally, there is only eternal aware space, and aware space naturally and necessarily invaginates from the magnetic attraction to itself, thereby creating an appearance of duality. The bottom half of the circle represents aware space alone, the original, eternal, undifferentiated, infinite, etc. The fold in the middle represents the function of the original aware space, which is to be aware. And the top half of the circle represents the resultant duality, which naturally arises from this inherent folding process. Since the top half of the circle is only a reflection of the original, it will be a mirror image copy of the original. Therefore, every quality of the original in the bottom half will manifest as a mirror image or its opposite in the top half. For example, the quality of being eternal will manifest in the top half as being temporal, or having the quality of time, which is the opposite of having the quality of being eternal. Likewise, the bottom half quality of being undifferentiated will manifest in the top half as being differentiated. The world of the many, the infinite, will manifest as the finite. The permanent will manifest as the impermanent, etc., etc. We could see evidence of this dynamic wherever and whenever we look at nature, by virtue of the fact that everything in nature is asymmetrical. Asymmetrical. Just as the original architecture of the 360-degree circle. The clearest example where we see this asymmetry is the left and right side of our own faces and bodies, or the nodes, the stems, the branches of any plant. Everywhere we look in nature, we find that one side is a copy of the other side, but always slightly off or asymmetrical. A more challenging example of the asymmetrical is the spiral shape that is found in every level of nature, from our DNA to the spiral galaxies. The spiral shape is also one of man's earliest religious symbol, pictured to the left. Which makes perfect sense when you consider that the spiral is the natural result of a bent or curved asymmetry. And in true mirror-like fashion, the logarithmic spiral, which is this spiral, pictured to the right of the shamanistic spiral, is always and necessarily, as scientists say, scaled perfectly to the original curve. So basically, before I walk away from this, so basically the, what is it called? The logarithmic spiral. This one mirrors the dynamic that I was talking about, where the curve is going to bend asymmetrically, so it's always going to be going out exactly further out from the original run. And that's going to repeat itself endlessly. Evolution, always going around, but getting bigger each time, growing each time, evolving each time. All right, so now we move on to May 10th, 2013, where I write, "It is all natural and perfect, just the way it is. Just like the contraction of the lungs or the heart or whatever. The contraction is not an error or something to be avoided. In fact, contraction is as vital to the system as the expansion. On every level, this is true. I was just thinking about how we, as humans, we praise expansion and we apologize for contraction when it is all part of the same movement. Everything is constantly evolving, and after you have collection, which is expansion, the natural order is for this amassed collection, whether it be oxygen, blood, energy, karma, etc., it's to be dispersed, and contraction is simply the method or the conduit for this disbursement of said collected energy. And this contraction not only disperses the energy, but makes room for the next expansion. It is also goddamn simple, and the implication is that it is all perfect, even the tragic, seemingly tragic. I know it's horrible to say, but it's true. I've always loved the blues man. Tragic circumstances are the seeds for character and soul. The blues man knows from their from their own tragic experiences, the beauty of joyful participation in the sorrows of life. Seen in the proper perspective, the struggles of our life are simply mirroring the original tension of basic desire or attraction. This is another example of as above, so below. On the level of the substratum, that would be the above or the original dynamic, there is the cyclic pulsation or contraction and expansion of itself that gives rise to the appearance of the world in the first place. Then, within that very world that was created from this cyclic original dynamic, that entire emergent world itself, in turn, sustains and maintains its own balance via the same exact dynamic of contracting and expanding cyclically. There simply could be no other way, as there's nothing else except for this original dynamic of aware space attracted to itself, resulting in the emergence of the potential within that awareness. That is the whole show, folks, but words could never do it justice. As simple as this sounds, it just keeps folding in on itself, transforming the very simple into an almost impossibly complex system of puzzles, illusions, and various tricks that keep us going, spiraling in circles. So let us continue on the spiraling path and see where it takes us. So now we continue with May 14th, 2013, where I write, "The qualities of the world mirror the qualities of that which created said world. Much like a child mirrors the qualities of the parents that created the child." So going back to the dynamic of as above, so below, let's start with the original dynamic that is best depicted as the very simple Yin Yang symbol. The Yin Yang represents the union of seemingly opposites, thereby emerging as harmony. While unpacking the original dynamic of the Yin Yang, we find a female aspect and a male aspect at the very center. The female side, or the yin, represents the immeasurable, the inactivity, the space, the potentiality, etc. And the male side, or the yang, represents the measurable, the activity, the awareness, the actuality, etc. It is the union of these apparent opposites that emerge as the world we know. So, the emerged world is much like a child who has no choice but to effortlessly mirror the identical qualities of that which produced it. Consequently, we should not be surprised to find that our reproductive systems themselves mirror the reproduction system that created the world in the first place. The female has eggs, womb, and invagination that clearly are a physical expression of space, inactivity, potentiality, etc. Likewise, the male has an outward extending erection with fertile sperm, which is clearly a physical expression of the active or consciousness aspect that transforms the potential to actuality. It is the triunistic union that created the appearance of our emerged world, and within that emerged world, the resultant male and female once again unite to create their own emergent child, which in turn will mirror the original dynamic by being attracted to its counterpart and replicating the whole process infinitely, ultimately engaging in yet another triunistic union. And this, folks, is the only game in town. This is the only dynamic that has ever existed and the only dynamic that could ever exist. This is the very design of life itself. So below are just some of the examples that I've observed in nature that demonstrate how the emerged world that we all experience mirrors the same qualities of that which created it. So now I'm just going to go through briefly some of these examples that I noted. The first is that everything in the emerged world exists in outer space, which mirrors the original dynamic of all appearances existing in the field of aware space. The next one is that everything is alive or organic. This mirrors the original undifferentiated awareness. The original dynamic is all there is awareness. So within the illusory world of duality, everything is going to appear to be alive, organic, mirroring awareness. Next, we have the power of attraction drives the process of creation itself. Like I said, whether it's the tree following the light, whether it is the male pursuing the female, all these things are examples of the power of attraction driving the process of creation itself. And just as the self-attraction of awareness, the vortex, the black hole, gravity, contraction, etc., they all mirror the original tension of that self-attraction of awareness to itself. All right, the next one is seeds, eggs, and brains are all examples of a whole world contained in potential and ultimately emerging inside out. This mirrors the original dynamic of all of existence appearing in imagination or aware space. Next, I wrote the infinite, the eternal, how you never find an end, the asymptote, the endless horizons, the chimera, etc. These are all mirroring the original unmanifest, which by its very nature is immeasurable. So what I'm saying is even in space-time matter, the world of duality, we still find, or we're still aware of, infinite, eternal, how we never find an end, endless horizons, asymptotes, chimeras, all these examples of the original dynamic of the immeasurable. Okay, next I wrote, the world is illusory. Nothing is graspable in this world. You know, how we're trying to find, let's say, the small unit of measurement, or the smallest thing, the very smallest thing that we think the world is made up of things, but we find out the thing is actually just an aggregate of smaller things. And you say, okay, well, at least those aggregate of smaller things really exist. No, actually, when you look at the smaller things that make up that aggregate are also just aggregations of smaller things. And you say, okay, well, at least that thing exists. Nope, actually, when you look at that thing, it turns out to be an aggregate of even smaller things. Well, but you still got smaller things, so those are real. Nope, those smaller things are just aggregates. Aggregates all the way. You're not going to find anything that's not an aggregate. All right. So the world is illusory, nothing being graspable. Oh, that's what I'm saying, how the world's being graspable. We think we could grasp a single unit of something. The minute we try to grasp that unit of something, it turns out it was just an aggregate of other tiny things. And you just keep going down and down and down, but you want to find something you can actually grasp and say, this is it. You can't, because it turns out that was just a result of tiny things spinning around to give the appearance of solidity of something else. And you say, okay, well, what about those things that are spinning around? They're just aggregates all the way down. Everything is ungraspable. And what I'm saying is that mirrors the original dynamic of the original unmanifest being absent of any inherent existence whatsoever. All right, next we have all is connected, or a continuum. Just like we have the space-time matter continuum, again, it mirrors the original continuum of the triunity. All right, next I have one and many, or individual whole. We also have that dynamic in the world of duality. The original dynamic of the one and many is mirrored out in this emergent world as individuals colonizing to make various wholes. Whether they are coordinated armies or entire branches of governmental power, we can't help ourselves but to mirror the original dynamic from whence we all came. So once again, the original dynamic of the one appearing as many plays itself down here, of the one and the many all being a continuum. The next one I have is evolution. And yes, once again, the original dynamic is always evolving. Because remember, the whole includes the top half of the circle that is in a constant state of evolution. So although the bottom half of the circle remains unchanged and unmoved, the top moving part of the circle is an aspect of the original dynamic. All right. Next we have filters, creating specifics of reality. This mirrors the original dynamic where the process of individuation is the original filter that transforms the unmanifest into the dualistic world that we all experience. And within this dualistic world, what creates our experiences is filters from our senses, filters from our brains. Everything that we experience is a filter of a whole, which mirrors the original dynamic of us as the filter. We, if you take yourself to be a person, what you really are is actually just a filter. All right, next we have multiplication, division, copying, mirroring, replicating, etc. are all the tricks that the one employs to appear as many. So once again, we have the original dynamic where the one contracts on itself to create the appearance of two. Within this world of duality, the emergent world, we also use multiplication, division, copying, mirroring, replicating to make the one appear as many. Which goes back to my original, or not original, but my thought before, how I was saying, I think that in time we're going to find out how there is no addition or subtraction. We're going to find out there is just division, and multiplying. Division and multiplying. That's all there is. So it's one thing, but it could appear as many by dividing and multiplying itself. But nothing could be added or subtracted. That whole concept seems weird. All right. Oh, actually, I start to say that. All right. I'll repeat myself. As a matter of fact, it is my contention that one day we will discover that there was never such a thing as addition or subtraction in the first place. It is all multiplying or dividing, because in the ultimate dynamic, there is only the singular. And the folding and unfolding of the singular is the only movement of the singular. And these folds of the singular imply that no part can ever be added or taken away from the whole. Instead, the whole can only fold itself, creating divisions and multiplications of itself. Another dynamic that I thought was interesting is that the way it multiplies itself is by dividing itself. You divide yourself, you create a multiplication. But my favorite three dynamics that play out in this emergent world that mirror the original dynamic are potentiality, magnetism, and emergence. Those three, the triune of potential, magnetism, and emergence. Originally, there was only potential. The act of magnetic attraction spontaneously transformed the potential into an emergence. But the experience of time does not enter into the equation until the emergent obscures the potential. So, you can't even explain the original dynamic in temporal terms. Nevertheless, we do see that potentiality, magnetism, and emergence play out in the most crucial roles in every aspect of our physical sciences. So, I view these three specific components as the most fundamental to the countless examples of the triune that we see in nature. Again, potential, magnetic attraction, and emergence. All right. So now we come to May 29th, 2013, where I write, my mind has been drawn towards the virgin birth or self-origination for some time now. I haven't written about it at length because it just sounds insane, but I want to find a way to communicate how reality is giving birth to itself continually. How amazing it is that awareness just spontaneously arises, bringing forth everything into being. But I really want to break it down into slow motion and show how awareness behaves like a waveform. I wouldn't know where to begin, but just to get an idea of where I'm going with this, think of desire as a waveform. The desire causes a peak of energy, and as the desire is met, the waveform collapses again until it rises again with the next desire. Okay, so I'm saying that desire is to individuals what magnetic attraction is to awareness. And awareness, becoming aware of itself, oscillates itself infinitely like the waveform of desire, as above, so below. To elaborate this point further, the Christian concept reminds me of the virgin birth, reminds me of what philosophers refer to as the causeless cause. While looking for the first cause that created the totality of reality, the question invariably becomes, well, what caused that cause? So the first cause of the totality must be an uncaused cause. While I know almost nothing of the Christian version of the virgin birth, I am a witness to the actual virgin birth of reality. And this is what it looks like. We will begin outside of time, since we are talking about the causeless cause. And more importantly, we will start with the only thing that is, which is aware space. Even though we are talking about a dynamic that is not temporal in nature, we will obviously have to discuss it as such, since words can only be uttered one at a time. So, the furthest back we could go in our imaginations is undifferentiated aware space. Space represents the inactive aspect of the original nothing, while awareness represents the active aspect of the original nothing. The inseparability of awareness/space or aware space, the inseparability of aware space necessarily results in awareness being magnetically attracted to itself due to the very inherent nature of the potential to be aware. But with nothing else to be aware of, the magnetic attraction is the original dynamic that transforms the potential of being aware to the actual emergence of consciousness, conscious of, aware of. I refer to this as bent space because the sheer magnetic attraction to itself contracts aware space in a bending or a folding manner, resulting in a vortex of experience, like our own private little black hole. It is this vortex or black hole that is experienced by us as the I am. The very bending of aware space creates the appearance of otherness, which is the only ingredient necessary for the almighty first sense of I amness. This is the actual virgin birth. This is your story. This is not the story of just Jesus, but rather the story of existence altogether. We are the virgin birth, still in the process of that original miracle. The I amness arises from awareness contracting to become aware of itself. From the virgin birth of I am, naturally and necessarily brings about what I suspect the Christians are referring to with their concept of the original sin. Again, I know zilch about Christianity, but the original sin sounds an awful lot like what the Buddhist concept call avidya, or original ignorance, basic ignorance, of taking ourselves to be this appearance of the I am. That is the basic ignorance. And once you begin the identification process with the perception of I amness, this process inevitably devolves into further ignorance of I am this and I am that, and all these other things that come and go, like being a parent or a husband or a worker or a lover or this and that. Okay. And before we continue, I want to circle back to what I had before when I was talking about the peak of desire. Of considering desire to be a waveform. So basically, what I was saying, if I want to illustrate this, is that desire is met with a waveform, and as that desire is met, then that desire wanes and it resolves back into the original. And what I'm saying is the original contraction of awareness, this is mirrored out with desire. The original dynamic is awareness becoming aware of itself, and within that contraction, we're experiencing that as desire for specific things, whether it be food or sex or any of the things to procreate. Okay. So now we continue with October 5th, 2013. The following is a letter I wrote after I discovered the Jewish concept of Ein Sof. And now I'm going to show you a picture of the concept of Ein Sof. All right. So this is what I discovered. This is the Jewish concept of Ein Sof. And I'll go ahead and put this up here on the screen while I'm talking. Back it up. Okay. They even got the part. They even got the part of the bending or folding that I've always been so excited about. Here is the Jewish Triunistic model in a nutshell. Ein Sof is the first aspect of the triune. It is what I call the unmanifest. Israel is the third aspect of the Trinity. It is what I call the world. The Torah is the second aspect of the Trinity, which is the link or intermediary between the unmanifest and the world. Here is the most exciting part. The reason the Torah is the link between the Ein Sof and the manifest is due to a concept called tzimtzum, which is the contracting of God. And just like the bending of light creating a rainbow, the Jewish tzimtzum is the bending or contracting principle that creates the appearance of a world. Holy shit. The Jewish tradition has known this all along. The only difference is when most read this stuff, they seem to interpret these teachings as how God decided to and then implemented his plan to create a universe. It is all seen through the lens of personification. I included the illustration above because this looks exactly like the upside down version of the same structure that I described with the black and white circle. So now I just put these two next to each other for side-by-side analysis. Basically, it's the same thing that I came up with, but upside down. Or I guess you could say mine's upside down to what they came up with, since they came up with that, I imagine, thousands of years ago. But anyway, I was very impressed. Like I said, I was looking over the internet for any type of historical context for what I experienced, and it's very hard, to be quite honest with you. It's really hard to find any historical context, so I was really impressed to find the Jewish historical context. All right, so that is that chapter, but as with all chapters, I want to end with the base, path, and fruit of all of the triunes that I captured in that chapter. So I'll go ahead and put this in front of you for a second. Take a screenshot if you want. Again, if anybody wants the book, I'll send this to you. I'm almost finished. All right, so this is the base, path, and fruit. So the base, path, and fruit that we talked about in this one are capacity, consciousness, manifesting as duality, isness, tension, manifesting as creation, God and man manifesting as the world, or really the God and man world. It's really God disappears in deference to the man and world. So some of these, I'm going to get into this in the next chapter, but some of these base, paths, and fruit, the base and path are usually the union resulting in the fruit, but sometimes it's the opposite, and I'll go through that in the next chapter. Anyway, we have the inactive and the active manifesting as manifestation, as the manifest. Life, learning, love. Awareness contracting to create self-awareness. Aware space bending to create a vortex of experience. And the Ein Sof bending of the tzimtzum into Israel. All right, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. The next chapter is going to be as. That's a really good one. So we have what it is, what it does, and what it appears as. So we just covered what it does, and the last chapter will be what it appears as, and then the final section will be a section called So, where I'll draw the conclusions of the what it is, what it does, and what it appears as. All right, well, thank you very much. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.